Now, we've been over a ton of details with regards the sliding collar strangle. What I don't want you doing is getting lost in a whole sea of details and not being able to strangle someone when you're out there on the mat in a competitive situation. So what I'm going to do now is present everything that we've learned into a coherent and pretty simple system. I'm sure you're all aware that I'm well known for teaching a back system of strangulation without the gi. What I'm going to offer you now is a system which I teach and use for strangulations with the gi from the back using the sliding collar method. Because we're working with a jacket, the system is considerably different from the no-gi system and follows quite a different order. Let's break it down into a really quick, easy to learn 4-step system and then run through each step of the system in detail. Now we're starting to look at an overview of the sliding collar strangle system. Let's start off with step number 1, which is just to establish the position. This part of the system is the most similar to of the various 4 steps to the no-gi system. There's not a lot here that's different. If we have a training partner sitting on his buttocks and we get behind our opponent from a situation like this, we're first going to establish our position. Now, we're going to draw our training partner back. Because we're operating with a jacket on and a gi, we're going to assume that we're working under the current international rules. That means that if I get behind my opponent, I only score points if I place hooks in symmetrically, like so. Okay? I have to hold this for a period of around 3 seconds to score my points. If I immediately go to a body triangle, I do not score points. So let's understand, in situations like this, when we work with a gi, it often makes a lot of sense when you first go in to focus on just controlling your opponent for 3 seconds with symmetrical hooks and picking up your points. Now, once we've ridden out the 3 seconds and our points have been scored, now I generally recommend a quick transition. If you are long enough, let's make the transition into a body triangle. If you feel that's going to be physically difficult to achieve on your opponent, let's instead place our foot across our training partner's hip and then take our second foot and stand on our own foot, just like so. Now, with this position, we can hold people who are even very big through the stomach and hips. Once we've established our position, we'll move on to the next phase. Okay, so we have a simple methodology here where once we fall towards the floor, we initially lock up with our feet symmetrically placed, just like so. We hold this for the period of time required to score points, usually a few seconds, and then from here we make a choice by placing our foot on the hip between either bringing the leg across and locking a body triangle, very, very strong physical control, or if that should feel difficult to achieve, we hook our foot across our training partner's hip and we place our foot close to the first foot, just like so. You also have the option of putting the foot here on the hip to pressure downwards on your opponent. Now, the natural thing to ask is, which side do I fall towards? Okay, I just fell towards what we call the control side. I have 2 hands here. I have a control hand and a strangle hand. We just fell towards the control side. Another option is to fall towards the strangle side, and we'll be looking at both fairly shortly. In situations where I fall to the strangle side, once again, we hold symmetrical hooks, and in this situation, we hold for a period of time. From here, once the points are scored, now we have the option of locking up a very robust body triangle or placing our feet over the hip just like so. So it's going to be very hard for our opponent to escape. Remember, the symmetrical hooks score your points. However, they are not the most robust leg configuration. If my opponent were to straighten out his left leg, he would easily go over the top of my hook and start to escape. So as a general rule, we want to raise the height of the hook, like so. And as the height of the hook rises, it becomes much more difficult for my opponent to slide over the top. It becomes even more difficult when we lock a body triangle on our opponent. But just be aware that locking a body triangle or having your feet asymmetrically placed won't score points in a jiu-jitsu tournament under standard international rules. So I generally counsel students when they're working with a jacket, score your points first, and then focus on a very secure lock. And then from there, we'll enter into step 2 of the collar strangle system. So now we arrive at step number 2 of the collar strangle system. This is a step that I put an extraordinary amount of emphasis on. The step is to establish our strangle hand. I'm going to tell you straight right from the start. The precision with which you set the strangle hand is a huge, huge part of how efficient your strangulation is going to be at the end of the story. So I always put a heavy emphasis on proper setting of the strangle hand. We're going to demonstrate it with Mateus sitting in front of the camera. And from here, we're just going to go over quickly the main details involved here. First, we always have 2 hands. We have a control hand, which goes under my opponent's arm, and a strangle hand. The general method that we employ is the 2-on-1 lapel feed method. The idea is that we take our strangle hand thumb and we set it right at the base of my training partner's chin, just like so. I take my training partner's lapel and I feed the lapel to the thumb. Okay? As the thumb locks in here, index finger meets thumb, and from this position I exert a downward force on my training partner's lapel. This ensures that the hard, sharp edge of the lapel lines up underneath my training partner's jawline and sets a very, very good strangle indeed. We never want to go in with the flat of the lapel. So the idea is we place the strangle thumb just in like so, and we feed the lapel to the thumb. Then from here, look how the action of my left hand sliding the lapel down sets the hard blade of the lapel onto the carotid artery. Then we employ what we call the biting method, where my strangle hand bites into a position until I can see my own index knuckle. If you cannot see your index knuckle, you are not setting the strangle hand properly. Okay, so we need to do 2 things. We need to set the strangle hand and we need to set the lapel. So there's my hand set like so at the thumb. I bring the lapel to the thumb and I pressure down with my left hand to turn the blade, the edge of the lapel onto the carotid artery. Then I use the biting method to set my index knuckle properly where I can see it from this position. Now from here, I use the wrist flick. I bend my wrist and I snap underneath to set the strangle hand properly. Okay. Now you have a strangle hand set where you can see your own index knuckle. The edge, the hard edge of the lapel is set against the carotid artery, and we're in a perfect position to go into our strangle hold. So once again, control hand, strangle hand. We go through underneath. We use the 2-on-1 method where 2 of my hands are used to set both the lapel and the strangle hand. My thumb is placed in the appropriate position right there on the collarbone. I don't bring my thumb to the lapel. I never make the mistake of grabbing too much cloth. We only want to grip the lapel itself. So I bring the lapel to the thumb and I lock just on the lapel. I take my left hand, the control hand, and I pull down on the lapel to set the hard edge against the carotid artery. I use the biting method to set my hand with security and authority on that lapel that I'm going to work with until I can see my own index knuckle. From the index knuckle position, we're in a situation now where I can bend my wrist and then flick to go underneath the chin, and we're in the perfect position to start our work. Now we're looking at this 4-step system of strangulation with the collars from the back. We've seen that when we work behind our training partner like so, from here we have 2 hands, a strangle hand and a control hand. The control hand goes underneath the arm, the strangle hand goes over the top, and our first big effort here was to set the strangle hand properly using the various methods that we looked at. Once we've established the strangle hand, the next thing is to establish the control hand. We have 3 excellent options to work with. There are other options, but the 3 big ones by far are to first get a hold of the second lapel, the so-called double lapel method. My strangle hand is set higher than the control hand. Don't have them symmetrical. one high, one low. From here, I take the slack out of the jacket by turning my hand down towards my training partner's crotch. So my control hand goes down in a straight line and the strangle hand goes around the corner, rather like you were cutting someone's throat with a knife. And from this position, we get a lot of strangulation success. The second method involves taking my control hand and locking the knuckle line of my training partner's hand. Don't grab the wrist, don't grab fingers, grab the knuckle line and turn his palm into his own chest and stomach. When he goes to move around from here, you have an excellent ability to shut down his defenses while still employing a very strong strangulation. The third great option that we have in these situations is to forsake the lapel and the hand and instead go downstairs to the pants. We move around. The key element in gripping the gi pants, we never go all the way down here and take illegal grips inside. I don't want to reach too far down and I don't want to be above the knee. When I go above the knee, the pants can often tend to ride up and we lose traction. So what we do here is we take 4 fingers and we go on the outside of the knee and just below the knee. And the 4 fingers gather up cloth. That means that when we commit, you'll have a very, very strong pulling force on your training partner's leg that can draw yourself to an angle on him and create a very, very strong, forceful use of leverage, which will create big, big strangulation pressures from this position. So those 3 options, when we go to set the control hand, we can either go double lapel, we can go knuckle line, or we can go outside pant grip. All 3 are excellent options. Now we come to the 4th and final step of the collar strangulation system. This is to maximize the mechanical power and advantage of the strangle. There are 4 key elements involved here. Let's have a look. Once we get behind our opponent and we have successfully established our position with hooks and we're ready to start and we've successfully established the strangle hand and we've taken any one of those various 3 alternatives with the control hand, then it's time for us now to start maximizing our mechanical power in the stranglehold and taking advantage of this jacket that we're working with. The first thing we're going to look at here is the setting of our legs. I have 2 legs. As my opponent goes in to defend the stranglehold and grab my hands, etc., I have 2 legs to work with. Let's talk first about my direction leg. My left leg in this case is the direction leg. It goes up and it gives direction across my training partner's body. As I shift out, the second leg that goes over the top is my power leg. The idea behind the power leg is it dominates my opponent's far shoulder. I can use my calf muscle and ankle. I can use all the way down to the hamstring muscle and knee. Whichever part of my leg you feel is appropriate, I'll use that. Okay, anywhere from here, even the back of the thigh. Now, from this situation, the use or the function of the power leg is to control that far shoulder and exert a pushing force on my opponent's shoulder that brings his head away from me. Okay, the direction leg gives direction to the push, perpendicular to my opponent's body, out in this direction. I don't want my direction leg between his legs pushing downwards in alignment with his body. I want the force exerted across the body. So my direction leg gives direction to the force exerted by the power leg. So my right leg controls the shoulder, my left leg gives direction to my body movement. And as a result, we hit almost a perfect cross position relative to our opponent, which will maximize our effect. That's the function of our legs. Next big idea is the idea of our head position. In naked strangles, when we work behind our opponent, our head is always glued very, very tightly to our opponent, and that puts a limit on how much body weight I can incorporate into a strangle. In the case of most naked strangles, almost none. However, when we use the jacket from situations like this, look how my head moves away from my opponent. My head and torso are a very significant part of my body weight. And from here, as he tries to fight and turn towards me, look how I just hang my body weight off of my opponent. And as a result, we get a big percentage of our body weight hanging in this direction. By using my body weight to complete the strangle, it takes a lot of the need for power away on my part. I can just literally relax into the strangle. And even if my opponent has hands inside the lapel and fights with everything he's got to defend the strangle, I can hold for long periods of time if necessary and work my way through to the strangle. The next key element is the idea of forces going in opposite directions, so-called coupled forces. A theme that I always teach in submission holds is the idea of coupled forces. I want two forces going in opposing directions to achieve my objectives. In the case of these strangle holds, you will see very clearly that once my direction leg goes across my opponent's body and the power leg goes over the shoulder, my power leg exerts a force away from me, pushing in this direction. Just make sure the push is downwards onto the shoulder, not upwards where you bleed force off. As we push downwards on the shoulder, my strangle hand pulls upwards on the neck. So we get two forces in exactly opposing directions. And this creates very powerful strangulation forces on my opponent. So my strangle hand is coming towards me while my power leg is going away. And this creates an enormously strong strangulation effect upon our opponent. The fourth key element involved in this final step is the idea of the three-finger grip. We're just going to come closer to the camera and look at the intricacies of grip. So often when we set the power hand in this position, people will make the mistake of incorporating the pinky finger. And as a result, when they get behind their opponent and they apply all this power that we've been talking about, their pinky finger comes under tremendous stress. In fact, in some cases, it's so painful, I've seen people just let go of strangles because that pain becomes unbearable. As you're trying to strangle him, he puts a hand inside his collar, defending, and you're fighting here, trying to get over the top, and you feel like your own pinky knuckle is going to break. Okay? In these circumstances, I always recommend let the pinky knuckle go. It doesn't add anything to the strangle power. It's just going to hold you back. So we let the pinky knuckle go. In some cases, I'll even let the second knuckle go, because most of the strangulation power comes from these first two knuckles, okay, and the thumb hidden underneath the collar. I have the choice between an open three-finger grip, which is the one that I favor the most, and a closed three-finger grip, where I take my pinky and I put it underneath. Okay? Both of those grips are highly effective. I generally just go for, once I set the hand, an open three-finger grip. I usually find that's the easiest one to get in. But sometimes I'll take the extra distance and put my pinky underneath, like so. Whether you go for open or closed doesn't really matter. What does matter is that you're gripping with two fingers doing most of the work, a third finger doing a little bit of the work, and this enables you to strangle with a straight wrist, and that's very important. If I grab with all four fingers, when I go to exert force, my wrist will tend to bend around my opponent's neck, and we get very weak and anemic strangles as a result. I want my strangle hand nice and strong and straight. So what I do is I point my index knuckle down and I lift the pinky knuckle and I let my pinky finger go. Now when my opponent goes in to grip his lapels and resist and do all the things that people do, and from here, now we can incorporate the true power of the legs. And from here you can see my direction leg, giving direction to the strangle. My power leg takes away his arms, and then from here we can incorporate pushing and pulling forces. My legs push, my strangle hand pulls, and most importantly, your strangle hand, because of the grip you employ, will be able to manage and withstand the tremendous forces that you are applying through your body weight and your legs, and put an ungodly strong strangulation upon your opponent. This four-step system is absolutely the most high percentage way to attack the sliding collar strangle from the back. Of all the submissions in the sport of jiu-jitsu, this is the most high percentage one. You must invest time in the stranglehold. This is one you must be very, very intimately familiar with. I've given you a ton of details and now a simple 4-step system to incorporate those in a step-by-step procedure that you will be able to start using tomorrow to increase your success rate with this all-important stranglehold. Now, we've seen right from the start of this video that a small number of strangles are responsible for almost all the successes in major competition. There is no doubt whatsoever that of all the methods of strangling with the jacket, the king, the undisputed king of them all, is the sliding collar strangle from the back. More people get strangled out with this method of strangulation than all the others put together. If you're going to focus your success in jiu-jitsu and on strangles in particular in any one area, this is the one to focus on. Okay, we've put a lot of time into giving you the small nuances and details of the sliding collar strangle. Now what I want to do is to give you the big picture and show you how it all comes together. Let's understand that there are 2 major scenarios where we go to work with the sliding collar strangle. Okay, these are scenarios where you initiate with the position, and there are scenarios where you initiate with the strangle hand. So if someone is in turtle position, for example, here I do not have the rear mount. I do not have hooks in. That shouldn't stop you from going in for your strangles. I can start by setting the strangle hand. Okay, I don't even have a hook in yet, but I'm already starting to work towards the strangle. So your first option is to initiate with the strangle hand. The second option, which we'll be looking at very soon, are situations where you initiate by getting hooks in on an opponent, and you start from situations like so. Okay, so if Giancarlo goes back to turtle position, your 2 big options here are 1, start with the strangle hand, which we've just done here. The other option would be, say for example, to break my opponent down from turtle position and get hooks in. Once we get hooks in, now we set the strangle hand. So that's your fundamental choice when you go to attack with the sliding collar strangle. Will you focus on getting the position first and then working from there, or will you focus on getting the strangle hand in first and working from there? I'm going to first show the idea of working with the strangle hand first. This is a very, very effective way of working. They're both very effective. You should become a master of both. Let's look at the idea of setting the strangle hand first and how everything comes together from there. Okay, we're going to have turtle position facing towards the camera, Giancarlo. From here, we go through and we set the strangle hand. We go in and lock up. I put one hand in and there's the strangle hand set. If we just set up for one moment, you'll see the hand is in, thumb applied, and we're ready to go. Now, the next thing I need is a cross hook. So from here, I'm going to pull my opponent's elbow and knee apart with a simple tug that creates space for us to work with. From here, I'm going to throw my foot across my training partner's body. Okay, so we've inserted the hook, we've got a strangle hand, and we've got a foot in. This gives us a measure of diagonal control. I have a right hook and a left arm, so both sides of the body controlled. Okay, now it's time for us to start going to work from here. One excellent way for us to do so is to put a hand in behind our training partner's hamstring, and then from here, send the man over. So we end up in the cross back position. I've got a support hand locked in anywhere from the knee to the ankle. They're all good. Okay. Then from here, we apply a 3-finger grip as we take our power leg over the top of our training partner's shoulder, and we're in perfect position now to strangle. So you can see there's a definite order of operations going on here. Just facing the switching cone. We start off by getting the strangle hand in. Now we have to create space to get that cross hook. So we give it a little tug, and there's the space. Remember, it only has to be the width of your foot. So we're not talking about a lot of space here. It doesn't have to be anything dramatic. Now we take our body and we throw that hook in on the far side. Now I look for a position for my support hand. Probably the most popular and all-round effective is the hamstring grip. We grip around our training partner's leg. Now we hit a simple roll. From the roll position, you can see we have our training partner rather discombobulated here. We bring our power leg over our training partner's shoulder as he goes in to defend himself and grab our hands, etc. So it's very, very hard for him. We have a 3-finger grip set and we're ready to strangle. Now, a nice alternative to gripping the hamstring is a bicep grip. Okay, let's have a look at how the bicep grip might look. Let's go further from the camera. The opening is exactly the same. We go in, we get our grip. Just like before, we create space between knee and elbow so that from here, we get enough space now to insert a hook. Once that hook goes over the top, instead of grabbing around my training partner's hamstring, I'm going to go here. I'm going to go forearm to bicep. And as a result, we can fall down and control our training partner's bicep. We're now in the cross back position. Leg goes over, the power leg set, and from here, we get a fantastic strangulation. Okay. You'll notice that we're finishing in supine positions, both of us facing up to the ceiling. That's a common thing. Okay. Some other alternatives with regards the support hand. We go in on our training partner, we set the strangle hand, we separate elbow and knee. From here, I throw my foot in and we roll on through. Other alternatives will be the wrist, where we lock in on our training partner's wrist and go to work. Facing the camera, Giancarlo. Because we ended up in a supine position, another excellent option is always double lapels. Okay, we bring the foot across and finish with the second lapel. Now, sometimes you're going to work with an opponent who has a very strong base and they're very resistant to the idea of being flipped over into a supine position. Okay, and as you go to flip them over, they'll put legs up and widen their base, etc., etc. In these situations, you go for your prone finishes. It's not essential that you roll your opponent. Okay, it's not important at all. If he does roll, that's fine. If he bases out and puts legs and arms out for base, that's also fine. You're just going to end up with a prone finish instead of a supine finish. There is one difference, however. If you're going to go for the prone finishes, I only advocate 2 uses of your support arm, either the hamstring or you can go into your opponent's bicep. I wouldn't go with double lapel. I wouldn't go for wrist controls, etc. So that's the only real difference here. So we've got an opponent now. We go in, we set our strangle hand in place. We successfully separate knee and elbow. That's not so difficult to do. But when we throw our foot in, we see our opponent put a leg out for base of support. So it's going to be hard. The hands are wide, and it's going to be hard to roll them over now. Whenever we see that, we just grip, we get our foot in, and we just go head down to the floor. I place my second foot in, strong base, Giancarlo, and then from here, we just strangle right where we are. Okay? Don't think you have to roll your opponent onto his back. It's not true at all. Okay? In fact, in competition, about 30 to 40% of finishes are prone finishes like this. My favorite grip, anytime you go prone and you're facing down to the mat, is grab the hamstring. Okay, I think the bow and arrow strangle from that position is best of all. However, sometimes in the heat of the moment, you can't get to the hamstring. Another great grip is the bicep grip. So once again, we have an opponent. We set our strangle hand in. We do a good job of separating elbow and knee. I go to throw my foot in, and he separates his leg. And oh man, there's no way I'm going to be able to roll him now. Okay, no problem. Another fine alternative is forearm to elbow. Roll through, he goes prone, and then from here we insert the power leg underneath our training partner's leg, and we get a strong strangulation finish. Okay, so running through all of that again. We've got opponent in turtle position. First basic category of attacks, get the strangle hand first. Okay, so we go through, we set the strangle hand. Next big thing, separate elbow and knee on the far side. Then we make a cross hook, go in. Once we get cross hook position, the big question now is, where are we going to set the support hand? How am I going to get to my cross back position? Will my opponent fall over to a supine position, or will we stay prone? That's up to him. We don't determine that. We should be ready for both. If my opponent goes into a roll, we come out on the other side of it in the cross back position. The last step in the chain is always inserting the power leg. Okay, we put it in place. We finish with a 3-finger grip, and it's done. Back to turtle position. This time my opponent has a strong base. We successfully set the strangle hand. We successfully throw the hook in. Unfortunately, he's able to base out this time. Okay, we get the cross hook position. I throw my power leg over the top. We strangle for the finish. So you can see what's happening here. Once we set that strangle hand, you got two main directions that you can go in. They'll be determined by your opponent's response. If his base is narrow and you throw the hook in, you'll tend to roll him over to a supine position. This gives you a lot of freedom with what you do with your support hand. You've got a bunch of choices. You could go double lapel. You could go double lapel. You could go to a half Nelson. Okay. You could go wrist control. You could go bicep. You could go leg. They're all good. Okay. The second situation is where your opponent bases out. Then he goes into, you'll go into your prone finishes. With prone finishes, I only really recommend grabbing either the hamstring, the bow and arrow strangle, or going into your opponent's bicep. Those are the two best methods on a prone opponent. Now, another way we have to be effective is a situation where we break our opponent down and get our hooks in, but we don't yet have our strangle hand set. In these situations, we might, for example, roll our training partner over. And from here, we find ourselves in a situation where we've got hooks in and we want to initiate the strangle. Just turn towards the camera. Okay, from here, our whole thing is we've got to hide the strangle hand. As he goes in to fight my hands in this position, we do a good job of using the hidden hand underneath our training partner's arm. That's going to create a situation where I can roll the wrists and then fence my hand in and lock it in place. As he tries to pull my hand down now, it's awfully difficult. And it's easy for us to go through, peel, and get the cross hook position. From cross hook, look how we're making that strangle shift. We're going around the corner towards the cross back position. From here, we have a bunch of choices. I could just stay on the wrist. I could go to the bicep. I could put a hand behind my training partner's neck, like a half Nelson kind of situation. I could come all the way down to my training partner's legs. All of them will do a good job, okay? All of them will result in a situation where you're in the cross back position. Then the only thing remaining is to throw in, you guessed it, the power leg, where the foot goes over, locks in place, and becomes an integral part of the strangle for the finish. And as always, when we go to finish, we use the 3-finger grip. We just go close to the finger. The idea is that when we get into a serious strangle, I want to use a 3-finger grip centered around the index finger. We lock up, and from here, 3 fingers enable us to get the maximum potential of our stranglehold. If I lock on with the pinky finger, we tend to get a situation where we get an incomplete covering of the carotid artery. So we go in, most of the work is done by the index finger. The last finger can even be completely left out of the picture. We get a 3-finger grip, and we get a very strong finish as a result. Okay? So there we have it. A basic overview of the most important strangle of them all, the king of strangles, the sliding collar strangle from the back. We've seen that you've got 2 basic ways to operate here. You can either initiate with the strangle hand, or you can initiate with the position. You've got to be effective in both. If we initiate with the strangle hand, it tends to go into a split where we either finish supine or we finish in the prone position. Again, you have to be good at both because you don't know what your opponent's going to give you. You have to be effective in both scenarios. You will see throughout all of those that many of the themes we've talked about at length throughout this video started to emerge. This idea that once we tilt our opponent over and start going into the strangle, we need a cross hook. Okay, you can't have your feet symmetrical as you would just to score points for the rear mounted position. You need a cross hook going across his body. This is going to make it possible for you to go into a strangle shift where you go from lined up with your opponent to perpendicular. Once you go perpendicular like that, you can take a choice between how you use your support hand. Are you going to grab the leg? Are you going to grab the second lapel? Are you going to grab the bicep? Those are all your choices. The truth is, they're all pretty damn good. And then we want to get the power leg, the key to effective strangulation with a jacket. Throw the leg over the shoulder and use the strength of the legs and your hanging body weight to create enormous strangle pressure upon your opponent. The best way to maximize that enormous pressure you're capable of generating is through the 3-finger grip, where 3 fingers lock around our training partner's lapel and draw in and allow us to put enormous strangulation pressure on our training partner's neck. I promise you, if you devote considerable time to the development of this skill, it's a stranglehold that will never let you down. It's a stranglehold you'll be using from white belt all the way through to World Championship black belt. No other strangle is as successful in competition as this. If there's one thing you get out of this video, I want you to become a master of the sliding collar strangle from the back. Now, we just gave you a very simple 4-step rendition of all the details we went over on the sliding collar strangle. Now let's look at a modification that occurs if we fall to the other side of the body. So if I have Matheus here in front, we know now we have a control hand that goes under Matheus's arm and a strangle hand that goes over, okay? And from here, we're always looking to get our grips in place. Now, previously, we fell to the side of the control hand. And as a result, we could go directly into that 4-step system. What if it turns out when I set my strangle hand for whatever reason, either because I initiated it or because Matheus initiated it, we fall to the side here? What do I do now? Now I can't use my right leg as a power leg on top of Matheus's shoulder. This is a real problem. What am I going to do? I'm going to get control here of my training partner's knuckle line. And from this position, I'm going to take my foot and put it underneath Matheus's leg. I'm going to lift and elevate so that Matheus's body comes off my bottom leg. Now my right leg is free. And as a result, I can use my left leg like a pendulum. I come up to an elbow, just like so. So I'm on my right elbow. From this position, I swish on my legs and I take my knee right there to my elbow and I pass my left foot across. From this position, I take the 3-finger grip and then we just strangle right here. If for whatever reason Matheus is able to get a hold of my hand and cause problems, then I will simply lift Matheus's shoulder. We have now converted our body position. I can now employ a power leg and a direction leg. And then from this position, we go right back into the opposing forces and a sufficiently strong strangle for the finish. So, excuse me one minute. If I fall to the control side, we just hit the system as we explicated it earlier. If I fall to the strangle side, I have to add a few steps. I have to first free my legs by lifting my training partner with one and bringing my bottom leg out. Then I come up to an elbow. And as a result, I can slide my knee and elbow together and take a seated position from where I can throw my foot over and turn it back into the same scenario that we've been strangling with. Let's have a look at it again. We'll face this way this time fast. So we go in behind our training partner and we set the strangle hand by the regular methods. From here, as he goes in to defend, we get a hold of our training partner's knuckle line. Now, normally I like to fall to the side of the control hand, but Matheus takes me over to the side of the strangle hand. Now I can't use my right leg over his shoulder, the keynote element of strangling with a jacket. So we're going to take our foot and lift our training partner's leg up. From this position, I take my hook out and I lift my training partner so that my right leg is now free. I use my left leg as a pendulum to bring me up to my elbow joint. You will see that I am positioned right there on my elbow. Now from here, I swish on my legs and I bring my knee to my elbow like so. I draw my training partner into a seated position and I pass my foot across. Even if Matheus's foot is up high in a defensive position, it's an easy thing for me to clear the leg out of the way and place it in. Now from this position, I bring my body into the same finishing position that we've been looking at all day. There we have the cross position that we're looking for. My head hangs off my opponent's body, and from this position, my power leg exerts a pushing force while my strangle hand imparts a pulling force. Now, let's understand something very clearly about this particular variation of the move. We're going to face this side. So, here we are behind our training partner. We set the strangle hand as we always do. From here, my opponent falls over to the side of the strangle hand. This means I will not be able to use my leg as a power leg. No problem. We hook our foot underneath, we take the power leg off, and we scissor our legs as we lift, and as a result I can use my leg as a pendulum to come up to my elbow. From here I heist, I put my knee in behind the shoulder, and now my second foot goes across. Now let's understand something about the strangle. I can use a short leg here to strangle Mateus because I'm pushing with my shin into the back of our training partner's shoulder blade and scapula. And as a result, I get the pushing force that works against the pulling force of my strangle. So we've still got an excellent strangle here. Even though my power leg hasn't gone over the shoulder, it's pushing behind the shoulder. I don't care. Just so long as I'm pushing into the shoulder, either from the front or the back, they're both equally good. However, if my opponent's shoulder should come off the mat, then I will extend the power leg, put it over the shoulder to go into an efficient push and finish. The keynote theme here is simple. Whenever we go to strangle with the jacket, with the lapels, as much as possible, we want to incorporate the strength of the legs. This probably the single greatest advantage that lapel strangles have over naked strangles is that we can employ the legs to strangle. If I'm behind Mateus and we're employing a naked strangle, there's almost no way in which I can incorporate my legs into the stranglehold. I'm really forced to strangle with my upper body in these positions. The beauty of strangling with the lapel is that for the first time we get to incorporate our legs into the stranglehold. We'll just move this way. And we have two basic ways of doing so. I can use the shin to push behind my training partner's shoulder girdle, like so. Or I can take the leg out and use hamstring and calf to push on the front of my training partner's shoulder. So whether I push from behind the shoulder with my shin or in front of the shoulder with my calf muscle and ankle, they're both great options. But what we have to understand here is that anytime we work with a jacket and we're looking to strangle our opponent, we must incorporate the strength of the legs into the strangle. This is the single biggest advantage that collar strangles have over naked strangles. You want to maximize the use of that every single time. The problem associated with falling to the strangle side is that we can't use the legs anymore. He's sitting on top of my leg. So we need a simple mechanism to recover our leg position and incorporate the power leg. Once again, just one more time, Mateus. Okay, for a right-handed strangle, all of my strength in a right-handed strangle is going to come from my right leg. So once we set the power hand and we go to work in situations like this, if I fall to the side of the control hand, it's so easy to incorporate the power leg. Okay, I just throw it over his shoulder and we're ready to strangle. But if I fall to the side of the strangle hand, now he's literally sitting on top of my power leg. I can't use it. I can't get my leg over his shoulder. So we need to be able to bring the power leg back in. We have to do that by taking it out first. Then, when we sit down to a position like this, now it's so easy to either push on the back of the shoulder or push on the front of the shoulder and use that power leg. So if the single greatest advantage of gi strangulations over no gi strangulations is the legs, we have to be able to access our legs as a power leg every single time, regardless of which side we fall. So you'll see that the system for the sliding collar strangle has two sides to it. It has the control side, which is simpler, where I have a control hand. If I fall to the side of the control hand, we just throw the power leg over the top and you're ready to start. And it has the second aspect of the system, where if I fall in this direction towards the strangle hand, then I have to learn to take my power leg out to get him off my power leg, so to speak. And then from here, we can recover the power leg and get back into our strangle game and incorporate those powerful legs to create opposing forces to maximize our strangle pressure. Now, the way we're trying to portray the gi back system is in terms of 4 essential steps. which are quite radically different from the no-gi system. You can see why I teach them as two different systems. There's not a lot of similarity between them. They start the same way, and once the first system is passed, they're more or less completely different. We've seen that it requires a little modification depending upon which side we fall towards. It also requires a little modification depending upon whether we're top or bottom. Everything I've shown you so far, Mateus was on top of me, I was underneath him, and we strangled from the back. What about other situations? Say, for example, Mateus is in a turtle position. Facing this way, please. And from here, we have hooks in on our training partner, and we're trying to attack. From these general situations, we're going to go through and put our hand in here. We're going to use our second hand to put our head down on the floor. Now from here, we're going to reach underneath, and we're going to use the 2-on-1 lapel feed to lock up on our training partner. I bring my hand back into his wrist. How am I going to employ my power leg from this position? First method, my opponent's elbow is down on the floor. I'm going to bring my knee and thigh on his back. And now we have the perfect position to strangle. If I see him take his elbow off the floor, then I'm going to pass my foot through underneath. And as a result, we can stretch out and strangle. Now, you couldn't see any of that because of the angle. Let's have a look at that from another angle so you can get a bit clear of what I'm doing. Okay, the big picture I'm trying to point on you is this. Whenever we work with the jacket, we have to employ a power leg to maximize our strangling leverage. Okay, no exceptions. If you're not using your legs to finish these strangles, you are literally, you are selling yourself short in a terrible way. Only when we start incorporating the legs are you really going to start impressing people with your strangles. So from the situation where I have a hook across my training partner's body, and I go in and secure my training partner's wrist. From here, I use the 2-on-1 lapel feed, and my hand goes in. If I see my training partner's elbow is on the mat, then from here I'm going to place my thigh on the back of his neck. And my right thigh engages in a pushing force where we get good strangulation power. Alternatively, I can hook inside my training partner's arm for an even more dramatic effect. And from here, we can stretch out for the finish. You can see what's happening. I'm forming an X shape across my opponent's body. Now, instead of using the back of my leg to push on my training partner's shoulder with the power leg, I'm using my quadricep, the front of the leg, and putting pressure on my opponent. You can often make use of these in a very powerful way when you're incorporating top strangles, when you're on top of turtle position. Now, I'm going to give a word to you here. Very often, I was demonstrating in a rather soft fashion on the test because it's kind of an uncomfortable strangle. But when you're going live in a competitive setting where it's a hard fight, very, very often you're going to employ the strangle from the top, and your opponent will fold under pressure and fall to his back. Then you just go back to the same finish as we saw earlier. I'll give one demonstration of what that looks like. So in the situation with Mateus, he's in some kind of turtle position situation, and we've got a hook in on our training partner. From here, we start off, we get a hold of our training partner's lapel, we post our head down on the floor, and from here, I get my grip in. Now, my hand goes across my training partner's wrist, and I start to position my body all the way through. As I go to apply pressure, very, very often from here, my training partner will roll over, and we will end up in situations where we just continue in the usual fashion. That is often the case. In about half of cases we employ the strangle, the guy capitulates over and you end up finishing on your back. But there will be times your opponent stays in a turtle position and you will finish belly down towards the floor, applying pressure. The key element to remember is that when we use, we'll show it 45 degree, when we use these methods, first we get our grip. We're always looking to form the cross angle on our training partner, and then our thigh goes right over our training partner's neck. And from here, we just extend out, hold a strong body in the test, and we just extend out and strangle in this position, okay? If possible, we always feed the leg on through. And from those situations, we get very, very strong strangulation. So whether you use the back of the thigh or whether you feed your foot through under the armpit, you're going to get a lot of pressure. In about half of cases, you could expect your opponent to roll to his back, and then we finish in the standard situations. Now, we just looked at a situation where we were finishing in belly down positions. Okay, most of the finishes we employ with these strangleholds, we finish with our chest and belly facing up to the ceiling. Now we look in a situation where our opponent's in turtle position, and we go through, we secure the grips, and we strangle. I just showed you the modification where we use the power leg a little bit differently. Okay, we place the quadricep on the back of the neck and shoulder, and we push with the quadricep instead of what we normally do, which is to push with the hamstring or the shin on the back of the shoulder. That was necessary because our opponent was belly down to the floor in a turtle position instead of belly up to the ceiling in a rear mount position. Now, a word to the wise. Whenever I use this method, I almost always use a bow and arrow type strangle to finish. When we were using the standard method, where both of us are facing up to the ceiling, I told you that you can go in any one of three ways. You can go double lapel, you can go to your opponent's knuckle line, or you could go to the gi pants and take the bow and arrow position. However, when we go inverted and we're facing down to the floor, I'm going to change my advice. Then I'm going to say to you, I strongly favor the bow and arrow above the other two options. When we face up, your choice. All three are damn good. But when we face down, I'm going to recommend you grab the legs. I'll demonstrate this right now. In a situation where Mateus is facing the camera and we're behind our training partner, we've got our initial hook in. We set our control hand in place and we set the strangle hand. Okay. Normally, we strangle just coming over the hand, or we go in double lapel. But what I'm going to advocate is in these situations where we're belly down, we're going to get a grip in the gi pants or even wrap around the thigh. And from this situation, it creates a much stronger strangulation force. It also gives me the stability to hook in underneath my training partner's leg. And from here, the combined pull of both arms creates enormous strangulation pressure. If he should fall over because of the lift of my leg, we get even stronger strangles out of this position. Always remember, when we go to grip, we're not allowed to put fingers inside the gi pants, so we always get a grip just below our training partner's knee, and we maximize the force of the pull. You will be pleasantly surprised to learn that whenever you employ this grip, you can physically lift people's legs around very, very easily. It's a very light thing for you to lift. It's a strong grip, and it's not physically difficult for us to lift people successfully. We'll face in this direction simultaneously. So we're behind our training partner as before. Initially, I like to grab in here for the sake of stability. I put my hand down on the floor and my forehead goes down to the mat. Now we lock up and secure our grip. From this position, my left hand, instead of going to the wrist or the second lapel, I'm going to advocate we go into the gi pants. Just make sure we've got a legal grip. Now, from this position, we just start to apply our strangulation pressure. This strangle is so strong that in many cases, especially in cases where we fit the foot under the armpit, you will simply turn your training partner over and apply the strangle like so. So, modifying our system again for the face down situation, I'm going to change my usual rule. When we're both facing up, here I'm going to give you three equal choices between double lapel, which happens to be my personal favorite, knuckle line, which I also favor a lot, and bow and arrow grips, which are also very good. However, when we go to turtle position, I'm going to advocate heavily favoring the bow and arrow over the other two options. Okay, so from situations like this, initially we go in and grip the wrist, we go in and grip like so, and there's the grip on the gi pants. From here, it's so easy for us now to go into strong strangles and get the finish we're looking for. That's an important modification for the face down situations when we go to strangle with the sliding collar strangle hold. Now, all of the strangles from the back that we've looked at so far all worked out of situations where we had hooks in on our opponent. Okay, we had 2 hooks initially to score our points, and then we started making movements across our training partner's body and going into our use of the legs and strangling like so. But we did start off everything with 2 hooks in. One hook went across and became our direction leg. The other hook went over the shoulder and became our power leg. But at some point we had the hooks in, and you can clearly see my lower legs are heavily involved in the strangle, in the shape of both the power leg and the direction leg. Now, there's going to be times it's very difficult for you to get hooks in, but that shouldn't stop you from going into attempt strangleholds on your opponent. There is a very well-known and very famous form of stranglehold utilizing the jacket that doesn't employ the use of hooks, often referred to as a clock strangle. Let's have a look at the theory behind the clock, and I'm quite certain that with a little bit of training you'll be able to add this into your strangulation arsenal and get very good results with it. First, let's understand something about the nature of gripping. Let's have a seated training partner here. The grips are more or less identical to regular sliding collar strangles. The idea is we're going to go through on our training partner and use a 2-on-1 lapel method and set the strangle hand just in like so. With clock strangles, you have 3 excellent options to place the second control hand. My favorite option will always be double lapel in the case of clock strangles. However, you can also get great results by going to the knuckle line with your control hand, and you can go into the legs. However, it will be quite different from the strangles we've looked at so far. Instead of grabbing our training partner's gi pants, we're going to be looking to get scooping grips inside our legs like so. Don't worry, I'll show you how to do that very shortly. But the gripping sequences are quite similar to any other sliding collar strangle. However, the general nature of the strangle is significantly different. Okay, let's understand something general about strangulation with the jacket. One of the big points that I'm trying to raise upon you or to put upon you is that the single biggest difference when it's time to strangle with a jacket on as opposed to naked strangles is that with the jacket you can incorporate the incredible power of your legs and hips into the strangulation. When we work with naked strangles, that is much more difficult to do. Even when I don't have hooks in and I'm working with a clock strangle, you must understand this. Even though you don't have hooks, it is still your legs and hips that provide the horsepower behind this stranglehold. Let's have a look at some preliminary elements. First, the situation is almost always some kind of variation of turtle position. So we'll have the training partner in turtle position facing out in this direction here. Whenever I get into a turtle situation, there are a bunch of good starting points that I can begin the clock strangle with. I'm going to show you my favorite, which is a knee wedge, where I put my knee and wedge it behind my training partner's tricep. My body goes across my training partner's body so that my chin is positioned over his far shoulder, and my other leg comes out beyond my training partner's shoulder line. I don't want my foot behind his shoulder line. There's my training partner's shoulder line, the line that joins his 2 shoulders. I step forward past the shoulder line and my chin goes over the opposite shoulder. Now there is some risk associated with this position. If my opponent traps my wrist to his body and rolls through, he can end up pinning me in this position. Okay? So be aware of this. When we're in situations where we knee wedge on our training partner, I will often play with a short hand. If I commit too far in too early, that arm can be trapped quite easily. So initially, I often play with a short hand just like so. Okay? When it's time for me to go, I often do a triple pass on my training partner's jacket. My left hand opens the lapel and feeds it to the right. And then from this position, we start taking, we place our thumb and we place the lapel over the top, and we go in to establish our hand. I'll just demonstrate in this position. So I don't want to go in too quickly with my hand. He traps my arm, rolls through, and ends up pinning me. So once we come into this position, I play with a short hand my left hand opens his lapel and feeds it to the right. Okay. Now, I set my strangle hand, the thumb of my strangle hand, just as we did before on my training partner's collarbone, and then I put his lapel over the top and lock it up. We face in this direction. You'll see that my strangle hand forearm is parallel with the mat. I don't want my elbow down to the floor. I don't want my elbow up above his shoulder. My forearm starts off parallel to the mat, just like so. Now, from this position, I go in and I start to establish the second hand. Once my strangle hand is set, I don't have to worry about him arm rolling me. We'll soon see that that's no longer really going to be a problem. And now if Mateus sits up, you'll see that this is the double lapel grip that I favor. Okay, strangle hand has been set, double lapel is in place, and we're ready to start working. From this position, I'm going to take my left leg and step forward. Okay, classical methods of finishing the clock strangle usually involve some kind of set through. The method I'm going to advocate that you use is a sprawling method. I'll distinguish between the two very soon, don't worry. Now, as I take my left leg forward, I use that to shuck my head past the shoulder line. It should almost feel like you're going to fall off. From this position, I put my head on the floor and I use my head to make my legs light, and now everything passes Mateus's shoulder line and my hips go past his shoulders as he makes a strong base. From here, we start the action of walking our head around the corner, and we end up perpendicular to our opponent. The critical concept that you must get used to when you employ the clock strangle is the concept of the shoulder line. Here we have a training partner down. The shoulder line is the line that goes across his two shoulders, just like so. And that is the critical demarcation point that I must always be working with. Okay, as we work in this position, look how initially I open up my training partner's jacket, and there's the 2-on-1 lapel feed that we're always looking for. Once I set the strangle hand, I lock up the second hand like so we have double lapel. Now, watch my left foot come forward. I tripod and I throw my head and hips forward. And now everything goes past the shoulder line. From here, we hit a sprawl where my hips go down on my training partner, and as a result, we hit a very, very strong strangulation indeed. I'm just going to show you a whole bunch of details here. Mateus is down close to the camera, setting up Mateus. From here, when we first set our strangle hand, it's important that my hands be asymmetrical. The strangle hand will be very high, and the other hand will be very low. My control hand takes the slack out of the jacket, okay? And as a result, it goes straight down towards the crotch. As a result, all the slack is taken out of my opponent's lapel, so that when I go to apply a strangle on the other side, there's no movement of the jacket around the neck, which is a common problem. By taking away all the movement, we now have a perfect murderer's rope set around our training partner's neck. And from here, the strangles are very, very strong indeed. Little situation. So, our starting position, right in here, wedged in behind our training partner's tricep. From here, look how I open up my training partner's lapel, just setting up Mateus. First things first, I take my thumb and I put it on his collarbone, just like we did for the other strangles of the sliding collar. Now I cover the thumb and I use the biting method to lock in. Okay. Now from here, once I establish the strangle hand, my second hand goes in low and starts pulling everything down towards the crotch, so that now my opponent's gi, the lapel of the gi, has no slack in it. From this position, look how I need to get past his shoulder line now. I've got the strangle set. I need now to incorporate the legs into the strangle. So my foot goes forward and I push back with my two hands so that everything goes past the shoulder line. This creates a situation where I pass the shoulder and my hip is pressuring down on my training partner's shoulder, just like so. Okay? When Mateus tries to bring his head up, The head will rise, but the shoulders won't. And that is the pushing force involved in the clock strangle. Remember, essentially what I want here is a left-handed pull and a right hip push. If I just have a pull, his head can rise and he'll avoid the strength of the strangulation. So as I pull up with the strangle, my hips cover the head, and as a result, the hips push down while the strangle hand lifts up. Remember, the key element in all of the gi strangles is the idea of opposing forces upon our opponent. Normally, what we do is we put a power leg over the shoulder and we push with the power leg while we pull with the strangle hand. Here you don't have a power leg because you don't have any hooks in place. And so it's a different kind of push. It's a push with the hips down on the shoulder girdle while we pull up with the strangle hand. Now, this creates some interesting effects. When we go around our training partner and we set everything in place, there I have a left-handed strangle. You'll see everything has gone past the shoulder line. In situations like this, I just need a downward force on my training partner's head and shoulder girdle. The only way that can happen is if I go past the shoulder line. If I'm behind the shoulder line, it's just my hand pulling. It's only when I pass the shoulder line and come in with the hips in a sprawling kind of motion that we get a truly effective downward force on the head and shoulders. Now, a very common way, which is often used for demonstration purposes for the clock strangle, involves me sitting through, like so, and walking around. There's nothing wrong with this. It can be an effective method, but it does have some drawbacks. When I take a sit-through method, if my opponent starts sitting up, you can end up getting put back in awkward situations. In competition, I generally prefer to see athletes sit through and then sprawl. That sprawling action means when he goes to sit up, there's no way it's going to happen. And as a result, we get very, very strong strangulations. So, just a general overview of the clock strangle. Don't worry, I'm going to come back. There's a mountain of details here to really make it work at a high level, in high level competition. But our general overview, we're trying to create a situation where our hips push down while our strangle hand pulls up, so that we have opposing forces, as we always want in the case of collar strangles. Okay? When we first go into work, don't just put your hand in. Okay? Always feed the lapel into the thumb of the strangle hand, just like we did before. My favorite grip by far for clock strangles is double lapel. Nothing else is even close. From that double lapel grip, hand goes down to crotch, takes all the slack out of the jacket. Now from here, the first starting position we're going to look at is this wedge position where my knee wedges behind the tricep. Now, I step over my training partner's body. My first action is to sit through so that I beat the shoulder line. Once we beat the shoulder line, now we switch off to a sprawling method where my head comes down to the floor, and from here we put downward pressure with our hips and we get a very, very strong strangulation. That's a nice initial look at the big picture of the clock strangle. Now it's time for us to go back and to investigate the small details that'll make it work at every level of competition. Initially in your fundamentals class, but all the way up through your career to black belt. Now, the key element in the clock strangle, like all of the really high percentage collar strangles, is the idea of using the power of our hips and legs to strangle our opponent. Okay, we need a good setting of our strangle hand. We've seen a mountain of details on that earlier in the video, but at some point you've got to use your legs and hips. Now we don't have our hooks in the case of a clock strangle, so we've got to use our hips. And I'm advocating the use of a sprawling method as the strongest way to control our opponent's head and push his head down while our strangle hand lifts up. I'm going to show you the footwork pattern that I favor to ensure that this happens against strong resistance. We've got a training partner in turtle situation. Okay, we're going to start things rolling with this attacking position here, the wedge position that I often favor to initiate attacks out with a clock strangle. one thing never really changes. We always open up our training partner's collar and get our first hand in. If I see my opponent trying to trap my wrist, I'll play a shallow game with my hand in, just like so, until I see an opportunity to score it and pass it into a strangle hand. Okay, we use that 2-on-1 lapel feed and we're locked in. Once I get the strangle hand, I'm no longer afraid to commit my hand. Okay, I'll explain why later on in this video. Now, I'm advocating the use of double lapel grips. There are other grips we can use, but by far and away my favorite for the specific case of the clock strangle is double lapel. Now, let's have a look at footwork involved here. Okay, first things first, I need to sprawl my leg out. My knee was wedged behind Mateus's tricep. I need to get it out of there, so I sprawl the leg out. Now from here, I start an action where the inside leg goes under. Then from here, the outside leg comes up to the crown of my training partner's head. Imagine a line that went out of the crown of my training partner's head. I want to stand on that line. Once that occurs, I start to throw my body weight forward. Okay? I use my hands. Don't worry, I'm going to explain the throw in the next section. But essentially what it involves is taking my hips past the line of his shoulders. Just here. Now I hit what we call a sit through, where my knee slides under my other knee. So my right knee slides under my left knee. And then we hit the sprawl. I step around the corner and I go into my sprawl. As Mateus goes to walk around with me to relieve pressure, we will involve ourselves in a walking match. And I'm always walking on him with a disadvantage on Mateus. Why is Mateus at a disadvantage? Because my body weight's on top of his head. He can't walk very quickly. Okay, there's so much weight pinning him down that it's a difficult thing for him to deal with. We're going to demonstrate it with our butts facing the camera so you can see the turning motion involved. Okay, first things first, my knee goes in behind the tricep, and from this position, we get a hold of our training partner's lapel and we go into double lapel grips. Now, from here, I sprawl my leg out. Then from here, I sit my right knee underneath my left knee, and I step up to the crown of the head. I throw everything past the shoulder line, and my head starts to come down to the mat. As Mateus walks with me, we start this sit-through action, and we keep walking and walking and walking. But all the time we're walking, Mateus's head is getting pinned down to the floor, so that I have a distinct advantage. My head is free and my legs are free. So I can always walk the circle of the clock. Even though I'm walking a bigger distance than Mateus, it's easy for me to walk faster and more efficiently than him because his head is pinned to the mat. I'll just do this one more time. Sorry, Mateus, it's not a very pleasant drill. Here we are. We start off just like so. I pass the lapel across. I get my favorite double lapel grip, just like so. From here, I slide my right knee underneath my left knee. I take the big step up to the crown of the head. We throw everything past the shoulders until my hip is past the shoulder line, and then we start that action of sitting through. Many people will tell you this is the correct position to finish from. Okay? I generally favor going around the corner with my head and putting pressure on my training partner from a sprawling position. I'll explain why in more detail very soon. But that footwork pattern of my legs coming out, one leg coming through, second leg coming over, second leg coming through, and following and chasing, so we can walk in a circle until finally we can sprawl and put all of our weight on our opponent and our head down to the mat and strangle. That is the footwork pattern that you will be using as you employ clock strangles in a competitive setting. Now, there's an aspect of a clock strangle, particularly one done with double lapel grips, which is very, very important for your success or failure. Remember, a huge part of your ability to succeed with the clock strangle is to throw your hips past your opponent's shoulder line. So if Mateus is in a turtle position, we know now that his shoulder line, the line that joins his two shoulders, is our critical demarcation line. And our whole thing is to get our hips in front of his shoulders. You've got to beat the shoulder line, to put it as bluntly as we can. There's a shoulder line. My hips start behind his shoulder line, and I won't be able to strangle until my hips are in front of his shoulder line. And essentially what happens here is the weight of my hips on his shoulders provides resistance to my strangle. Classical sit-through methods like this do a good job of putting weight over the hips, but it's my experience that the best way of doing this is to put 2 hips on top of the shoulder girdle instead of 1. I currently have 1 hip on top of Mateusz. That's pretty good. But best of all is when we put 2 hips on top and we engage in a sprawling action. And from here, the entire line of the shoulders is controlled by body weight. And from here, we do our strangulation. This becomes even more extreme when my head starts to come down towards the mat. And those are my personal favorite ways of finishing the clock strangle rather than the classical methods of covering one shoulder with my head up and pulling in this direction. Okay, so my general spiel is this is good, but I generally prefer situations where we sprawl the head down to the floor and my head comes down to the mat. And this is where we do our strangulation from. When Mateusz goes to move his head in situations like this, it's very, very difficult indeed. This creates a very stable and very heavy structure to create very, very strong strangleholds. Okay, so it's all about beating the shoulder line, right? How are you going to do that? How are you going to put this guy's head down and beat the shoulder line? You guys have to develop a skill, which I've been called throwing your weight onto your hands. What does that mean? Okay, we're here, we've got our grips. I'm a big advocate, as I said earlier, of double lapel grips, like so, for the clock strangle. One is high, one is low. Now, from here, we go back down. In this situation, what I do is I take my knees off the floor and I position myself on the shoulder line. So I was here behind my training partner. Now I come up to the shoulder line. I put my foot over his head and now I throw both of my hands down towards his hips. As I throw my hands down towards his hips, I shuck my whole body, particularly at the hips, forward. And as a result, my hips are now past the shoulder line. This movement, which is often referred to as shucking, okay, is the key to get you from behind the shoulder line to in front of the shoulder line. You must become a master of this shucking movement so that you can make the quick transition from behind to in front. The shoulder line is the critical demarcation line, and you must become a master of going from back behind it to in front of it in the blink of an eye. So, as we lock up with our training partner, look how I cannot shuck if my knee is still behind his tricep. Okay, so the first thing is I take my knee out. I cannot shuck if my foot is out here to the side. I physically can't move. So the whole thing is to put my foot up to the line that comes out of Mateusz's head. Once my foot touches that line, I can take my knees off the floor, and that's what sets up the shuck. From here, my hands throw down towards his crotch and hips, and at the same time, I shuck my hips forward. And now we're in the perfect position to go. As my head comes down and we start the walking action, the strangle comes on immediately. I'm just going to demonstrate it. From a different angle because it can be tough to understand exactly what I'm saying here. Okay, there's Mateusz's shoulder line right there in line with the camera. Okay, we lock up. We get our two-handed grip on the lapel that we favor so much. I take my knees off the floor, just like so, and I start that action of bringing my knee over the crown of Mateusz's head. Now, my two hands rapidly just straighten out, like that. Like I wanted to extend my two arms. And at the same time, I throw my hips. Then when my head comes down to the mat, we get an enormously strong strangulation. The movement of your hands is best described. I'm sure you've all been in a gym at some point and you see that old silly machine that you use for tricep presses, okay? And you press down like so. And in time, you can put a considerable amount of weight on the machine. And you probably noted that when you used it, you can bring your head forward and put more weight down, like so. If you just stand out here and do it, it's very, very hard to move weight. But if you bring everything in close and over, you can move a considerable amount of weight. Well, that's exactly what you're doing here. You lock up double lapel, you bring the head down, you throw, and the arms extend in this fashion, and your hips go forward. So as my arms go back, my hips go forward, like so. So here we are. We're currently behind Mateus' shoulder line. As we lock up and we get our grips in place, look how I move around the corner. I come up. There is my head on his the line that comes out of the top of his head, and then in one motion we just throw and we're straight down and walking around the corner for the strangulation. And this is what we're looking for in the clock strangle. This ability to attach all of our body weight onto our hands and then with confidence throw our body forward. There's no other way to say this. You have to use this throwing of your weight. You have to have an air and a spirit of confidence when you do this. In your mind, it's going to feel like you're going to fall off him. Have faith that your grip on the gi will always secure you to him. You are not going to fall off his shoulders. Okay? I know when you first do, oh, I'm going to fall over. No, you're not. Your hands will hold you in place. Just throw him back and bring your hips forward. And as a result, you've now beaten the shoulder line and you're in a position to win. Now, we've talked about footwork for the clock strangle. Let's talk about the direction of your footwork now, because this is super important to putting a strong man down, breaking him down to a belly down position, and putting his lights out. You must master the skill of walking the circle around your training partner's head. You ever wonder why they call it a clock strangle? It's because imagine the center of the clock, okay? That doesn't move, but the hands of the clock move around the center. So the hands of the clock move around a fixed point. That's the idea behind the clock strangle. Well, what is the fixed point? The fixed point is your opponent's head. That's the fixed point. The point of the strangle, the head and the neck, doesn't move. But your legs, like the arms of a clock, move around. So if his head is the fixed point, your two legs walk around that fixed point, rather like the hour arm and the minute arm on a clock. So from a situation where we're behind our training partner and we start off getting our initial grips. I'm going to put loose grips on so that Mateus doesn't pass out in this situation. From here, when we go to move around our training partner, we know now a big part of it is a strong starting position, the wedge position, just like so. But at some point, we've got to come out of the wedge position, remove our knee, and then from here we start walking forward, challenging the line that comes out of the crown of our training partner's head. Now, from this position, look how as my knees come off the floor, I have the confidence to throw my weight onto my hands and bring everything forward and past his shoulder line. Now, just relaxing my strangle so Mateus doesn't pass out. My whole thing is to walk a circle. I don't want to walk forward. Rather, I want Mateus's head to stay stationary, and I want to walk around in a circle. Mateus will go to follow me, but he won't be able to because my hips are pinning his head down. The whole strength of this move comes from a walk where I go from Mateus's left-hand side and I walk past the crown of his head as though we're going to walk around to the right-hand side. You'll never get to the right-hand side because he'll be unconscious or tapping long before that occurs. But that's the intention that you have. So once again, I start off on Mateus's left-hand side. From here, I'm going to put on a loose grip so I can go as far as possible. Okay, this is the loosest grip I can get and still hang on to my training partner. From here, look how I go around the corner and I throw everything forward. And then as my head goes down, I start that action of walking around the corner. Walking and walking and walking. And from here, we get a very, very strong strangulation indeed. You're going to find, as you walk, you go lower and lower to the mat. And that's exactly what you want. The image I want in your mind is of your opponent's head being the stationary center of the clock, and your legs being the minute hand and the hour hand as they walk the circle around that stationary fixed point until your opponent goes unconscious. A big part of strangulation with a jacket is the juxtaposition between your strangling hands and the power of your legs and hips. So as your legs and hips push in one direction, your hands pull in the other. And that disparity between the pushing forces of your lower body and the pulling forces of your upper body is what creates incredibly strong strangulations and puts people out. There's no naked strangle in the entire repertoire which can approach the kind of power you can get using this push-pull method with the lapels. In the case of the clock strangle, it's a little different. You want your two hands to work as a team. You want them to work in unison. But ironically, the way they work in unison is to go in different directions. Remember, I've got two hands on my opponent's two lapels. What I want is one lapel hand pushing down towards the crotch and the other one pulling up towards the collarbones, so that my two hands go in opposing directions. Only when I feel my hands going apart from each other are you doing a proper job with your clock strangle. This is a very difficult one to capture on film, but we'll do our best here. Okay, first Mateus's body will be up a little bit, and from here we're going to look at the idea that we get our double lapel grip. I'm going to show you other grips later on, but this is the one I want you spending most of your time on for clock strangles. It's my belief that this is by far the most efficient for the purposes of a clock strangle. For the other strangles in the back, you can take your pick. There's good options, but for the clock, I favor this above the others. I will show you other variations, but this is my favorite by far. Okay, from this situation, what I want is my two hands going in opposing directions. You should feel like you're doing a trick with a murderer's rope around your opponent's neck as you go to apply the strangle. While your hands go in opposing directions, your hips will be pushing the head and shoulders down. So once we grip up, this will be the action of the hands. My two hands going in opposing directions. Don't try to pull with your elbows. Just straighten your two arms. It's the action of straightening my arms while I walk around the point of my opponent's head that will create the strongest clock strangles. Again, don't try to pull with your elbows. Straighten the elbows, and you'll find you go into immensely strong strangulations here. So as we lock up with our training partner and we throw our whip onto our hands, look how we just go around the corner, and Mateus will tell you it's an immensely tight strangulation that comes on very, very quickly indeed. Okay, we're looking at the clock strangulation. What I want to go over now is the incredible power you can derive from a true sprawling finish on your opponent. Okay, if you watch most people teach a clock strangle, you're going to see something like this. They generally advocate a sit-through finish where they do a good job of beating their opponent's shoulder line, and then from here they generally advocate a sit-through finish where the legs come forward like so, and from here we go into strangle. I'm not going to say this is wrong. Plenty of people have been strangled out by this method, okay? So it's not wrong, but it's kind of unstable. Okay, it can be rolled through, my opponent's head can come up, cause all kinds of problems here. Okay, so generally what I like to do is I use this as a transitory position. So I do use a sit through, I do go to this position, but then I double over it, I end up in a sprawl position. Did you see what happened to Mateus's base when I hit that sprawl? It always goes the same way, they all collapse. And then from here, my head goes down towards the mat and pins his head underneath my sprawl. And it's from there that we do our strangulation work. Okay, so once again, we start off behind our training partner. I'm going to put very loose grips on Mateus so he doesn't pass out or get hurt in this situation. So there I've got the loosest grips that I can use. From here, look, I move. First, I go past the shoulder line. So we put weight over the hands and we go past the shoulder line. Now I take the sit-through position, but I don't stop here. This is the traditional finishing position. Okay, I don't stop here. What I do is I put my knee down and I step over and I go into a sprawl situation that breaks my training partner down to the mat. Now my head goes down to the floor. And it's from this position that we do our strangulation from. If my opponent tries to walk with me, I will repeat the process and we'll keep stepping on through until we get all the way through to the finish. This sprawling method puts immense weight and pressure down upon your opponent's head. This is the single easiest way to ensure that the ideal of the clock strangle, which is to hold your opponent's head stationary while your legs walk around the stationary center of the clock, like the minute hand and the hour hand. This is the single best way to ensure his head is stationary while your legs are moving around that fixed point. Now, one of the really important points of a successful clock strangle is your head position. Okay, I'm going to contrast classical methods with the method that I generally favor. Okay, classically, when we get a hold of the training partner's lapels, we know we have to beat the shoulder line, and then we go into a sit through. Classically, the head is up, like so. Okay, I'm not going to say this is wrong, because I've personally seen many people strangled out by this method. This is the classical method. If you see it demonstrated, it's often demonstrated in this fashion. But I find in high-level competition, my head is positioned rather precariously here. It's easy for my opponent to move me around and roll me, and in addition, it's hard for my head to become part of the strangle. I'm basically limited now to my hips and my arms. Okay, so I generally prefer a crossover into a sprawl. And now watch my head. I aim my head for Mateus's far elbow. I'll say that again, it's very important. I'm going to move my head towards Mateus's far elbow. So I put my head down towards his elbow. And it's from here that I start the action of walking around and strangling my training partner. Okay? When you operate in this fashion, I'm going to demonstrate from a different angle, you will very often collapse your opponent down into belly down positions where they're even easier to strangle. It puts a very compromising weight down on your opponent's head. So in a situation where Mateus is in turtle position and we lock up on our training partner, from here the first thing we do is we throw all the way past the shoulder line. Now, as I go into the sprawl, watch my head go to his elbow. And now we just walk around the corner, and from here, the strangles come on very tight indeed. This sprawl with the head down creates immense pressure over your opponent's head and shoulder girdle and makes it very hard indeed for them to work their way out. Now, once you get good at applying the clock strangle, people are going to start fearing you for it. And you're going to go into a set of defensive reactions, which you often see employed against the clock. One of the most common that we see is people will collapse down to a side to relieve strangle pressure. Okay, it looks like this. We're here locked up with our training partner and we've got our favorite grip in place. Okay, I go to beat the shoulder line. That's the first thing. There's no need for him to defend until I beat the shoulder line. But once I beat the shoulder line, I go to apply the strangle, they collapse down to the side. Not a bad move on their part, okay? Because from here, when I go to apply my hip pressure, it's not the same. As he continues to turn onto his side further and further, you feel it's hard to go and finish the move, okay? So it's super important when we do this that we take our hips to our hands. Here, you can clearly see my hips are behind my hands. Okay, so as Mateus collapses to a hip, look how I just bring my hips over my hands. And now most of the strangle switches from my left hand to my right hand. Okay, so when my opponent collapses to a hip, my left hand is my primary strangle hand, and my right hand is my secondary strangle hand. When he collapses to a hip, I switch hands. Now the secondary becomes the primary. What does this mean? Setting up the test. Okay. There's a reason why I'm advocating to you that you use the double lapel, because I've got two strangle hands essentially. Okay. This one does 95% of the strangulation by going directly across the neck. However, this one takes the slack out of the gi and makes for a particularly strong application. When Mateus collapses to a shoulder, this one takes the slack out of the gi, and this one actually starts doing the work of strangulation. you just switch hands. This is one more reason why I strongly favor double lapel grips for clog strangles, because it gets you around this defensive reaction. So we lock up. I've got a good grip on Mateus, and from here he starts collapsing down to the floor. Here, if I tried to finish with my left hand, his collapse stops me from lifting and finishing with the left hand. So all I do is I just substitute and I start strangling with the right hand, the secondary hand. I just extend the hand and just walk out, and we get a very, very strong finish indeed. Just one more reason why I believe most of you should focus primarily upon double lapel grips when you go into strangle with the clog. Now, one form of defense we just saw is for our opponent to collapse to a shoulder. Not a bad idea on his part to do that, okay, because it does relieve pressure of the primary strangle hand. But we saw, because we had double lapel grips, you just switch hands and the strangle goes through just fine. Now our opponent's going to go to the next level, and he's not just going to collapse to a shoulder, he's going to roll me across his body. Okay, so what happens now? We go in and we set our strangle hand in place, and we start that action of going around the corner, and Mateus rolls me over right here. Okay, so I've been rolled clean over. I got good news and bad news. The bad news is you're no longer on top of your opponent. Okay, the good news is you still got a double lapel grip, and that means we can do exactly what we talked about previously about throwing our opponent's weight with our hands. Watch how as I put my feet down on the floor, I just flick my two hands down, and I put Mateus' body down on my hip here. So my hip is past the shoulder line a second time. As Mateus tries to come up on top of me, he strangles himself. If he tries to turn into me, again, he strangles himself. Okay? Because I have double lapel grips, we're always going to be able to get through to the strangle. Again, he turns left and strangles. He turns right and strangles. All I do is, as he turns left, I walk away from him. He turns right, I walk to follow him. Okay? As Mateus goes to work his way around, I can always use my free legs as a pendulum to come up, and from here get in behind him and recover into more conventional strangles. So don't be intimidated by someone who takes you over. Maintain the grip and just shock them down to your hips. You can either finish right where you are, or you can always use your leg as a pendulum, get up on top, and throw your legs into a more conventional strangle of the type we saw earlier in this video. Now, I've been teaching this clog series focusing primarily upon double lapel strangles, and I've been at pains to try and tell you that that is by far my favorite way of attacking the clog strangle. But of course, it's not the only method. Let's look at another one, which it's not my favorite, but I do use it, and it's very effective and has worked very well in competition for many people. This is where I have one strangle hand, and instead of getting the second lapel, I come through and I take the wrist. So, from a situation where Mateus is down like so in turtle position, and we lock up and we set the strangle hand in. What I'm going to do this time is I'm going to go through and I'm going to secure the wrist or knuckle line on my training partner. Now, from here, the leg work is identical. We bring everything on through, and then we just shuck using our opponent's forearm and bring everything by and lock up on our training partner's wrist. Now, from this position, my head comes down to his elbow, and as a result, we're in good position to start that strangulation process. So, facing in the opposite direction. From here, I go in, I set the strangle hand, and my hand goes through and catches my training partner at the wrist. And as a result, we can go through on our training partner. I pin his wrist down to the floor, and we start that action of driving through into a strangle. And this too is a very useful way of strangling out of the clog. Now, here's a common problem associated with a clog. No one wants your weight going past their head. So what many people will do is they will tripod. They will take their knees off the floor and go into a high tripod, and even go to stand up on you. So the elbows and knees come off the mat, elbows too, and then from here they start walking away from the effect of the clog strangle. Normally the hands are out wide, so they've got a good wide base, and this is where they go to resist us. Okay, so if we start down in turtle position, and I set a strangle hand in, and I see my opponent coming up like so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to thread my hand through, and I'm going to grip here. at the leg. And then from this position, I'm just going to walk around my training partner's body. And from here, we collapse him down to the mat. This creates an immensely strong stranglehold and immediately stops your opponent from standing up on you. So my training partner, just face this way, buddy. So we go in against turtle position and we get the initial grip, and he goes up into a 4-point position, and there's a danger now that I can be thrown off in front of him. So what we want to do in these situations is plant our foot in front and then go in and catch our training partner at the leg. And now I just walk 1, 2, 3, and head goes down, and we finish off with a very tight strangulation indeed. This is an excellent way to stop someone standing up out of a clock stranglehold and escaping.